thank you everyone for coming here. I'll complete the rest of the part of our mission. So it's feed the world, protect the future, live well. Let me first acknowledge the two co-authors, Professor Cheryl Hendricks from University of Pretoria and Rosen Chaudhary from Swansea University. They couldn't be here because they don't live in New Zealand. So I'm here. So let me spend a bit of time. Is it okay if I walk? No, not okay. Okay. No, I just wanted to clarify. I would like to spend some time on the story behind our work. So when we got the invitation from Quentin and we wanted to work on food security and gender, Cheryl and I talked about it, and we saw that there has been a lot of work on women in agriculture, like Dana was mentioning. If you empower women with resources, how would the productivity and yield would go up? But there hasn't been a lot of work on the nutritional aspect of it. So we wanted to look at the nutritional aspect, partly because when we were going through statistics, I'm trained as an economist, so I believe in numbers. And as we were going through statistics, the number of kids who are suffering from malnutrition was quite staggering. So the last global nutrition report that we see that 161 million children under 5 are stunted, and half of those live in South Asia. So that was kind of, I say kind of, but that was very intriguing, because South Asia, if we compare the two underdeveloped regions, suppose South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, we could see that South Asia has had tremendous success with Green Revolution, so food availability was there. There has been remarkable success in terms of women education. I was born in Bangladesh, and Bangladesh's success with women education comes very frequently. And India has had huge growth over the last few years. So when I looked at the statistics, it was puzzling. And if you look at this one, which is based on Global Nutrition Report again, and if you can see that in India, so this is a 2006 data. I'll come back to this number later. So in India, almost 48% of the children under 5 were stunted. So that translates into 58,126,000 kids. I'll just like to pause for a moment on this. And for Bangladesh as well, it's 41%. So because we have smaller populations, so it doesn't translate into a staggering number, but that is quite a bit of surprise. So when I looked at that statistics, because I'm from the subcontinent, my first thing was to look for the other indicators of development that if we can trace back. And one of the indicators that UNDP provided in 2014 was Gender Inequality Index. And if we just do correlation, compared to Bangladesh, India, if we think of Sri Lanka, Sri Lanka has had huge success in terms of addressing malnutrition. And in terms of Gender Inequality Index, Sri Lanka is 75th in the world, Bangladesh is 115th, and India is 127th. So that kind of gave us the context of why we wanted to work on stunting. So stunting is, I'm just going to say the official definition, stunting is low height for age, which is 2 standard deviation lower than median height for age of global reference population. And the reason we wanted to work on stunting, apart from wasting and undernutrition, is because the prevalence is much higher in stunting. And this paper is about girl stunting. So we looked at the data for girl children only. And this is the first, as far as we know. And now I'm going to explain why girl children, not that children should be gender, when they're less than 5 years old, the intervention are not gender specific, but the reason we thought that it could be more crucial to address girl stunting can be explained through this It's not really a circle, but it is supposed to be a circle. So I got it from Lancet UNICEF framework. So if a child is stunted, so there is a long-term impact. So as you can see that there will be poor cognitive development, which leads to adolescent stunted, and then they have reduced mental capacity, which affects their school attainment and then their productivity. And if we look at arrow 2, that leads for women, so that's where the basis for girls stunting to look at, it would lead to pregnancy, low weight. And in each of this, which ultimately goes to baby low birth weight, and in each of these arrows, one of the important factors is inadequate food and healthcare. So there is no denial of the fact that food availability matters. And what we are trying to establish that it is the household level food allocation that is something we need to consider when it comes to gender and food security. And as it is in the red, we have made much progress in in reducing the maternal mortality and infant mortality, but I think this is time to look for nutrition. So to look for a causal link between all this, what we tried to do, we looked at this framework for 3 layers of determinants for child's nutritional status, which has been implemented by UNICEF and has been applied quite a bit. Smith and Haddad, they have looked at, very recently there is a paper that came out on undernutrition. And there are 3 layers. So to give you an example, so the undernutrition, if a child is undernourished, it obviously depends on what food they're eating. So that's the immediate determinant. So that's their dietary intake. Now, what food they're eating depends on what is the household food allocation, whether there is access to safe water, sanitation, which are the underlying determinants. And then these are basically determined by the basic determinants, or in economics we call it deeper determinants. And these are social, cultural environment, political systems or governance, institutions, whichever way you define it, and also the economic structure. So our focus has been to look at the influence of the basic determinants. And we definitely wanted to look at the long-term aspects of it, how stunting and girls stunting and food availability is related. So the estimation method that I tried to make it simple. The estimation method that we applied is vector autoregression model. The reason we had vector autoregression because with this estimation, you can look at an exogenous shock in the system and see how far over time that shock is going to change the endogenous variables. So the endogenous variables are obviously girls stunting and food availability. Now, for girls stunting, we got the data from UNICEF. For food availability, it's a part of food security. I know fully well we took the FAO stat data on average dietary energy index. So it's an index which looks at, based on the population demand, what is the percentage that you have within your country. So it doesn't address the distributional issue, knowing fully that we didn't have an option but to work with this data set. And for exogenous variables, we have institutions which cover political freedom and civil rights across the countries. And then we looked at gross national income. Obviously, there is huge implication for economic growth in terms of resource distribution. And then we looked at female education. So far, given the Millennium Development Goal is coming to an end, there has been huge focus on female education. So we wanted to see whether that has made any difference, because the hypothesis is when women are educated, they can be employed and have better resources and better decision making. So the proxy for female education that we have used is a gender parity index at secondary level. So that's a female-male ratio of expectancy of schooling at secondary level. And then we did the specification test. As you can see that we have addressed 3 regions. So it's South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Middle Eastern and North African countries. So we made the decision based on the gender inequality index, which was higher than, except South Asia, those 2 were higher than the least developed countries index. And to get rid of those unobserved factors like history, culture, and geography, we did some transformation within the model to address those cross-country heterogeneity. We looked at the stationarity of the series so that we have a proper estimation, the numbers are telling us something meaningful. We also did a grandeur causality test, that whether something other than what we described here is influencing the result. And then we looked for validity of instruments. So this is a panel VAR estimation. And I'm not going to present the result. What I'm going to present is, this is called an impulse response function. So I'll give you an example with the impulse response function. So this is an impulse response function which looks at the change in girls stunting if there is a shock in food availability, and that shock is defined outside the system. So suppose we didn't account for research and development, right? So if there is a huge improvement in terms of agricultural productivity, that would be outside the system. And these graphs tell us, yes, there is going to be some impact on the girls stunting. Obviously, it would be reduced. But as you can see that, after the second year, it started increasing. This is an intuitive insight, and we can argue over the model. You can read my paper. That's not the main thing. But what it tells us that the focus that has been on food availability doesn't necessarily solve the problem with undernutrition, which is the problem. And now looking at the solution, what we can do is to focus on the distribution of food within household. There has to be concerted effort within the government, different sectors working together so that the women get a preference in terms of nutritious food. Now, there are 3 kinds of interventions that we can think of. One is nutrition specific, like I said, that there could be preferential more food which is nutritious, and there could be nutrition sensitive interventions, like you can have money for women to spend on food, specifically for food. I started talking about India. India has a National Food Security Act they're going to implement very soon. It's taking time to go to national level. And one of their policies is the women who are, since they're pregnant up to the 2 years of child's birth, they are going to get a social protection payment of 6,000 rupees. So this is basically nutrition sensitive, and we also need to work on enabling environment. So women's status and the gender gap has to be addressed more accurately throughout the region, especially in the developing region. And the last point I would like to make is there is a very dire need of investment in nutrition data. When we started our study, we wanted to look at micronutrient deficiency, and we just didn't have the data to conduct an analysis. And a lot of the data that we have worked out is taken over 5 years. So there has to be, if we want to measure the problems with stunting, wasting, undernutrition, and also overweight and obesity and micronutrient deficiency, we have to look at that. And I think one of the things, I will leave you with this thought, when we think about 2000, when we had the Millennium Development Goal Plan, since that time, we have gone quite a bit in terms of reducing poverty and hunger, because it was at the forefront of the development partners, it was at the forefront of the NGOs who were working there, and of course the government were involved along with academics. But now we are at the stage of developing our sustainable development goals, as we know, because we are approaching 2015. And guess how many times nutrition were mentioned? I'll leave you with this. Thank you very much.